I've lived with type 1 diabetes for 24 years. I know what happens when blood sugar spirals, trembling hands, blurred vision, the sickening sweetness before everything fades. But I never imagined my parents would choose a concert over my life. Your authorization has been cancelled, the pharmacist said. The reason? $2,000 VIP tickets for my sister. Just ration it, Mom said, dismissive. 4 days later, I collapsed, my sister's selfies glowing on my phone. When I woke in the ICU, Dad said 6 words that shattered everything. Have you ever realized you weren't their daughter, just their safety net? The stories on this channel are created solely for entertainment, educational, and storytelling purposes. While some stories are inspired by real situations submitted by viewers via email, most details have been fictionalized, combined, or altered. My name is Danielle Carter. I'm 36 years old, an accountant by trade, and I've been managing type 1 diabetes since I was 12. For 24 years, I've calculated every carbohydrate, timed every injection, and never once let my condition become anyone else's burden. But to understand why I ended up in that ICU bed, you need to understand my family. I grew up learning an unspoken rule. Danielle doesn't need anything. My younger sister, Lily, was the one who needed attention, encouragement, resources. I was the one who handled things quietly. I never asked for help because asking meant being difficult. I never complained because complaining meant being ungrateful. Somewhere along the way, my independence became their excuse to forget I existed. The pattern started early. When I was 16, my parents forgot to refill my insulin prescription. It was the week of Lily's dance recital, and their minds were consumed with costumes, rehearsals, and celebration dinners. I rationed my doses for 4 days, feeling increasingly sick while studying for my final exams. When I finally mentioned it, Mom just laughed and said, "Sorry, honey, we were so caught up with Lily. But you handled it fine, right?" I had handled it. Barely. And that became the lesson they took from every crisis. Danielle will manage. At 25, I discovered $3,000 missing from my savings account. My parents had access because it was a joint account, opened when I was a teenager for emergencies. They'd used my money to pay off Lily's credit card debt without asking permission. When I confronted Mom, she seemed genuinely confused by my frustration. "Family helps family," she said. "You don't need it right now anyway." Each time I swallowed my anger, each time I chose peace over confrontation, they learned something new about me. They learned I could take more. 5 years ago, my parents called me in a panic. They were 3 months behind on their mortgage. The bank was threatening foreclosure. Dad's voice cracked as he asked if I could help, just temporarily, just until they got back on their feet. I took over the payments. $1,200 a month. Dad made me promise not to tell anyone. "Don't mention this to Lily or your Aunt Susan. I don't want them thinking we're struggling." So I became their silent safety net, writing check after check, month after month, waiting for the day they'd acknowledge what I was doing. 60 months, 60 checks, $72,000. They never said thank you. They never asked if I was okay. They simply expected the next payment to arrive, as certain as sunrise. I kept paying because I believed something that now seems heartbreakingly naive. I believed love was measured by sacrifice. I thought if I gave enough, one day they'd finally see my value. One day, they'd love me the way I loved them. That was the first belief I needed to let go of. 2 months ago, I was laid off from my accounting firm. I called Dad immediately, explaining that I needed to pause the mortgage payments to afford health insurance. His response still echoes in my mind. "Sweetheart, we've already committed to other payments this month. Can you just push through for 2 more months until you find a new job?" And I agreed. I used my entire severance package to cover their mortgage, leaving myself with $800. 2 weeks later, Mom called with an offer that felt like a miracle. "Let us help with your insulin," she said warmly. "We'll put our credit card on file at your pharmacy. Family takes care of family." For the first time in my life, I felt like they were finally taking care of me. I thought they were finally seeing me. I didn't realize they were making sure I couldn't take care of myself. The arrangement lasted exactly 11 days. On the 12th day, I walked into my pharmacy expecting to pick up my monthly insulin supply. The pharmacist, a kind woman named Margaret, who had filled my prescriptions for years, looked at her screen with a puzzled expression. "Miss Carter, the card on file was declined. Do you have another payment method?" My stomach dropped. I asked her to try again, thinking it must be a technical error. She did. Same result. Declined. I stepped away from the counter and called my mother, trying to keep my voice steady, as other customers waited behind me. "Mom, the card was declined at the pharmacy. I'm here now and I need my insulin." Her response was so casual, so dismissive, that I had to ask her to repeat herself. "Oh, your father cancelled that card. We're getting a new one issued." "Just wait until next week, sweetie." I stood in that pharmacy aisle, surrounded by cold medications and vitamins, trying to process what she had just said. Wait until next week, as if insulin was something optional, like a magazine subscription or a streaming service. I explained that I only had enough insulin for 4 more days if I stretched it carefully. She sighed like I was being dramatic. "You'll be fine. You always figure things out." I ended the call and stared at my phone. I had $800 in my account. The insulin cost $400 without insurance. I could pay for it myself, but then I would have nothing left for rent, which was due in 6 days. I stood there, doing the math that no one should ever have to do, calculating whether I could afford to stay alive. That night, I sent my mother a text message. I chose my words carefully, making sure there could be no misunderstanding. "Mom, I need you to understand something important. Insulin cannot be rationed safely. Without proper doses, I could develop diabetic ketoacidosis and slip into a coma. This is not an exaggeration. This is a medical fact. I need the insulin this week. Please." Her reply came 20 minutes later. "You always dramatize everything. We're handling it. Just be patient." I stared at those words until my screen went dark. She had been warned, in writing, with medical terminology. She knew exactly what could happen, and she told me to be patient. The next morning I opened Facebook while drinking my coffee, trying to distract myself from the growing anxiety. That's when I saw Lily's post. A photo of 2 VIP concert tickets for Taylor Swift, fanned out like a winning poker hand. The caption read, "Best parents ever. VIP experience, hotel suite downtown, and Mom even bought me the cutest concert outfit. 3 more days until the best night of my life." I scrolled through the comments, friends congratulating her, Mom replying with heart emojis. I did the math because that's what accountants do. VIP tickets, $2,000, hotel suite, $500, new outfit, $300. Total spent on my sister's concert experience, $2,800. My monthly insulin cost, $400. They had the money. They had nearly $3,000 to spend on a single night of entertainment. And they had looked at my insulin, my literal lifeline, and decided it could wait. I sat at my kitchen table and felt something shift inside me. For years, I had told myself they didn't understand how serious my diabetes was. I had made excuses for their forgetfulness, their carelessness, their constant prioritizing of Lily. But this wasn't ignorance. This was a choice. They understood perfectly well. They just didn't care enough. There's a particular kind of pain that comes with being forgotten. But this was something different. This was being evaluated and found not worth the investment. My sister's single night of fun was worth $2,800. My continued survival was worth less than $400. For the first time in my life, I asked myself a question I had been avoiding for 36 years. Why do I keep trying to earn love from people who have already decided exactly what I'm worth to them? I did not sit passively waiting to die. I want to make that clear. I spent the next 2 days fighting to save myself. I called the pharmacy and asked about patient assistance programs. The pharmacist was sympathetic but honest. Processing took 7 to 10 business days. I didn't have 7 days. I called my doctor's office and begged for samples. The nurse checked their supply closet and came back with bad news. They were completely out of my specific insulin type. I downloaded the GoodRx app and searched for coupons. The best price I could find was still $280, and after setting aside money for rent and the minimum payment on my credit card, I had exactly $150 available. I thought about going to the emergency room, but I knew what that would mean. An ER visit for diabetic ketoacidosis without insurance would cost somewhere between $10,000 and $30,000. I would survive, but I would be buried under medical debt that would follow me for decades, so I rationed. I reduced my doses, skipped meals to keep my blood sugar stable, and told myself the same lie over and over. Mom said they're handling it. Just a few more days. I'll be fine. I had spent my entire life sacrificing for this family. Now I was sacrificing myself. On day 3, I sent one final message. Not to my parents, but to Lily. I typed carefully despite my shaking hands. Did you know Mom and Dad cancelled my insulin to pay for your concert? I watched the screen. The message was delivered. Then it showed as read. Seen. I waited for a response. An explanation, an apology, something. 30 minutes passed in silence. Then Lily posted on Instagram, 3 days until the best night of my life. She had seen my message. She knew. And she had nothing to say. By day 3, my body was beginning to fail. The thirst was overwhelming, no matter how much water I drank. Dizziness came in waves that left me gripping furniture to stay upright. Nausea rolled through me constantly. I recognized the symptoms because I had lived with this disease for 24 years. I knew exactly what was happening to me. By day 4, I could barely think clearly. I tried calling my mother one last time. The phone rang and rang. No answer. I knew I should call 911. I picked up my phone with hands that trembled so badly I could barely hold it, but the numbers on the screen blurred and swam. My fingers wouldn't obey my commands. Diabetic ketoacidosis doesn't just affect your blood sugar. It affects your brain, your coordination, your ability to think and react. By the time I fully understood how much danger I was in, I could no longer save myself. That morning, I had tried to walk to my mailbox, hoping desperately that my parents had mailed a check or that some miracle was waiting for me. I made it 3 steps outside my front door before my legs gave out. I crawled back inside, dragging myself across the threshold, but I couldn't reach back to close the door behind me. I collapsed on my living room floor, the morning light streaming through the gap where the door hung open. My phone was still in my hand. The screen lit up with a notification. Lily had posted again, this time a video from inside the concert venue. Her face glowing with happiness, the stage lights reflected in her eyes. The caption, "She's on stage. I'm crying." The last thing I remember is lying on my living room floor, staring at my sister's radiant smile under the concert lights. And somewhere in the distance, the sound of my front door, still open, creaking in the wind. Consciousness returned in fragments. First there was light, harsh and white, pressing against my closed eyelids. Then sounds filtered through, a steady electronic beeping that seemed to pulse in rhythm with something inside my chest. I tried to open my eyes, but they felt weighted, sealed shut by exhaustion I couldn't explain. Voices drifted past me, professional and calm, discussing numbers and levels and medications. I understood none of it. I slipped back into darkness. The next time I surfaced, I managed to open my eyes. The world was blurry, shapes moving around me without definition. Someone in blue scrubs, a machine with glowing numbers, white ceiling tiles. I tried to speak, but my throat felt filled with sand. A gentle hand touched my arm, and a woman's voice said something reassuring, but the words dissolved before I could grasp them. I drifted away again. When I finally woke enough to understand where I was, an entire day had passed. A doctor stood beside my bed. A woman with kind eyes and grey streaked through her dark hair. She explained things slowly, checking frequently to make sure I was following. "Miss Carter, you experienced severe diabetic ketoacidosis. Your neighbour, Mrs. Peterson, noticed your front door was open and found you unconscious on the floor. She called 911 immediately. The paramedic said if she had found you even a few hours later, you wouldn't have survived. I processed this information piece by piece." Mrs. Peterson. The elderly woman who had lived next door for 20 years. She had saved my life because I couldn't close my own front door. The doctor continued explaining my treatment, the insulin drip, the fluids, the careful monitoring. I had been in a coma for 2 days. 2 days of my life, simply gone. I asked what day it was, and when she told me, I did the math. The concert had ended yesterday. While I lay unconscious in this hospital bed, fighting for my life, my sister had been dancing and singing and crying tears of joy. Later, I asked a nurse how the hospital had contacted my family. She checked my file and explained that they found an emergency contact card in my wallet. My mother's name and phone number, written in my 12-year-old handwriting, laminated and tucked behind my driver's license. I had carried that card for 24 years and never thought to update it. The nurse also mentioned that Mrs. Peterson had ridden in the ambulance with me. She had made phone calls from the emergency room waiting area, reaching out to people she knew from the neighbourhood. One of those calls went to my Aunt Susan. That detail seemed unimportant at the time. I didn't realise how significant it would become. I asked the nurse what exactly the hospital had told my parents when they called. She pulled up the notes and read them to me. We informed them that you had been admitted for diabetic ketoacidosis and were being stabilised. Stabilised. That single word had given my parents permission to finish watching the concert. They heard that I was being stabilised and decided that meant I was fine, that there was no urgency, that the show could go on. They heard what they wanted to hear. On my 3rd day in the hospital, I was finally alert enough to have a real conversation. I was sitting up slightly, an IV still attached to my arm, when the door opened and my family walked in. My mother entered first, followed by my father, with Lily trailing behind. I watched their faces carefully, searching for something. Panic, relief, guilt. Anything that would suggest they understood what had happened, what they had done. I saw none of it. Mom approached my bed with the same expression she wore when visiting me with a minor cold. Mild concern, nothing more. She didn't rush to embrace me. She didn't cry. She didn't say, "Thank God you're alive." Instead, she glanced at the monitors beside my bed and said, "The doctor says you're stable now. See? You're fine. You always make things sound worse than they are." I stared at her, waiting for something more. An apology. An acknowledgement. Anything. Dad pulled a chair close to my bed and sat down heavily, releasing a long sigh as if he was the one who had been through an ordeal. He rubbed his face with both hands, then looked at me with an expression I can only describe as weary frustration. "Danielle, you have to understand," he began. "This concert was once in a lifetime. Taylor Swift won't tour forever. Your sister has been waiting for 3 years. We had to make a choice." I let those words hang in the air between us. He had just told me, to my face, that a concert was more important than my life. Not implied it, not hinted at it. Stated it plainly as if it was a reasonable position that I should accept, and he expected me to understand. I turned my head slightly to look at Lily. She stood near the door, arms crossed, looking uncomfortable, but not remorseful. She had received my text message. She had seen my warning about the insulin. She had read it and responded with silence, then posted about the best night of her life. I looked back at my parents and asked a question, in a voice so quiet they had to lean in to hear me. "When did you find out I was in the hospital?" The silence that followed told me everything. Mom and Dad exchanged a glance, the kind that couples share when deciding who will deliver bad news. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice defensive. "The hospital called during the concert. But they said you were being stabilized. We thought that meant you were okay. The concert only had 2 hours left. We thought we could come see you in the morning." She trailed off, unable to finish. She didn't need to. They had received a phone call telling them their daughter was in the hospital with a life-threatening condition, and they had decided that 2 more hours of concert was more important than being by my side. They had chosen Taylor Swift over their own child. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't demand explanations or apologies. I simply went silent, and in that silence, I heard something I had been suppressing my entire life. A voice inside me, small but clear, saying that I deserved better than this. For 36 years I had silenced that voice. I had told it to be quiet, that family came first, that wanting more made me selfish. I had sacrificed and given and ignored my own needs, believing that was what good daughters did. But lying in that ICU bed, looking at the 3 people who were supposed to love me most in this world, I finally understood something. That voice inside me wasn't selfishness. It was survival. It was the only part of me that had been trying to keep me alive. And I had almost destroyed it completely, trying to please people who were willing to let me die. I looked at my mother, my father, my sister. I saw them clearly for the first time, not as the family I wished they were, but as the people they actually were. And I felt something shift inside me, something fundamental and irreversible. "I understand," I said quietly, just 3 words. But something in my tone made all 3 of them freeze. They sensed it, even if they couldn't name it. Something had changed. Something they couldn't take back, couldn't smooth over, couldn't fix with excuses or justifications. For once in my life I had stopped trying to earn their love, and that terrified them more than any outburst ever could. What none of them knew was that someone else had heard every word of this conversation. My Aunt Susan had arrived at the hospital before my parents, called by Mrs. Peterson from the emergency room. When my family finally showed up on day 3, Susan had been in the cafeteria getting coffee. She returned just as they entered my room. She stood outside my door, coffee growing cold in her hands, and listened. She heard my mother dismiss my near-death experience. She heard my father explain that a concert was more important than my survival. She heard the admission that they knew I was hospitalized and chose to keep watching the show. For 36 years, Aunt Susan had watched this pattern unfold. She had tried once to intervene, when I was 20, and my mother had refused to speak to her for 6 months. After that, she had stayed quiet, believing peace was more important than truth. But standing outside that hospital room, hearing her sister justify leaving her niece to die for concert tickets, something in Susan changed too. They didn't know someone had been standing outside the door, listening to every word. Someone who had watched this pattern for 36 years. And this time, she wasn't going to stay silent. My family left the hospital room without looking back, and for a few minutes I sat alone with the beeping machines and the weight of everything I had just realised. Then the door opened again, and Aunt Susan walked in. Her eyes were red. Her coffee cup trembled slightly in her hand. She set it down on the bedside table and wrapped her arms around me without saying a word. I felt her shoulders shake as she held me, and when she finally pulled back, tears were streaming down her face. "I heard everything," she whispered. "I was standing right outside the door. I heard what your father said about the concert. I heard your mother admit they knew you were here and stayed anyway." She sat on the edge of my bed and took my hand in both of hers. "Danielle, I've watched this happen your whole life. The way they treat you compared to Lily. The way they take and never give back. I tried to say something once, when you were 20. Your mother didn't speak to me for 6 months afterward. She told everyone I was jealous, that I was trying to cause problems. After that, I stayed quiet. I thought keeping the peace was more important than speaking the truth." She squeezed my hand tighter. "I was wrong. I was so wrong, and I am so sorry." Something about having a witness, someone who finally saw what I had been living with for 36 years, broke something open inside me. For the first time in my life, I told someone the whole truth. I told Aunt Susan about the mortgage. How 5 years ago, when my parents were about to lose their house, I had quietly taken over the payments. $1,200 every month. $72,000 over 5 years. I told her how Dad had insisted on secrecy, how no one in the family knew, how they had never once thanked me or even acknowledged what I was doing. I told her about losing my job 2 months ago, and how I had called Dad to explain that I needed to pause the payments to afford health insurance. I told her how he had guilt-tripped me into using my entire severance package to cover 2 more months of their mortgage, leaving me with almost nothing. And I told her how, 2 weeks later, Mom had offered to help with my insulin, and how I had believed, foolishly, that they were finally taking care of me. Susan's face went pale as I spoke. By the time I finished, she looked physically ill. "They've been living off you this whole time," she said slowly. "You've been paying their mortgage for 5 years, and they cancelled your insulin to buy concert tickets. Hearing someone else say it out loud made it feel real in a way it hadn't before. The full scope of what my family had done to me laid bare in simple words. I was discharged from the hospital 3 days later. I went home to my small apartment and spent the first day just sitting quietly, thinking about what I wanted to do next. I didn't want drama. I didn't want tearful confrontations or screaming matches. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. What I wanted was something I had never allowed myself before. I wanted to choose myself. The next morning, I sat down at my computer and wrote a brief email to my father. I kept it simple and factual. "Dad, starting this month, I will no longer be covering the mortgage payments. I need to prioritize my medical expenses. I trust you understand." My hands trembled as I pressed send. Not because I was scared, but because I was doing something I had never done in 36 years. I was putting myself first. That same week, I went online and found health insurance through the marketplace. It was expensive, nearly $400 a month, but it was mine. No one could cancel it. No one could hold it over my head. I didn't block my family's phone numbers. I didn't send a dramatic message announcing that I was cutting them off. I simply stopped being available, stopped answering every call, stopped responding to every text, stopped showing up to every gathering. I didn't make a scene. I just quietly stepped back and let them experience life without me. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. It was Dad. His voice was panicked, but not in the way I had hoped. He wasn't calling to apologize. He wasn't calling to check on my health. He was calling about money. "Danielle, you can't just stop paying," he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "After everything we've done for you, we helped you with the insulin. We were there for you when you were in the hospital. You can't just abandon us like this." I listened to him speak, marveling at his ability to rewrite history in real time. "Dad," I said calmly, "you cancelled my insulin." Silence on the other end of the line. Then he said the words that confirmed everything I had suspected, the confession I needed to hear. "We thought you'd just figure it out. You always figure it out. We needed that money for Lily's experience, and we knew you'd manage. You always manage. There it was. The truth, spoken plainly. They didn't see me as a daughter who could be hurt. They saw me as a resource that could be used indefinitely. They had gambled with my life because in their minds I wasn't really a person with limits. I was just the one who always figured things out. Aunt Susan called me that evening to check in. She asked if I felt guilty about stopping the mortgage payments. I thought about the question for a long time before answering. I used to think helping family was love, I told her. But now I understand there's a difference between helping and enabling. For 5 years, I wasn't helping them. I was enabling them. I showed them they could treat me however they wanted, and I would still be there. Stopping isn't punishment. It's me finally respecting myself. The consequences unfolded naturally after that. Without my $1,200 each month, my parents began struggling with their mortgage. They fell behind on payments. The financial stress that I had been shielding them from for 5 years finally arrived at their door, and the truth spread through our extended family in ways I never orchestrated. Aunt Susan mentioned what had happened at a family gathering, not dramatically, just factually. She told them that my parents had cancelled my insulin to buy concert tickets, that I had nearly died, that the hospital had called them, and they had stayed at the concert. No one confronted my parents directly. But I heard from Susan that relatives looked at them differently now. The invitations to dinners became less frequent, the phone calls shorter. The warmth that family usually provides had cooled considerably. 3 weeks after I left the hospital, Lily sent me a long text message. I read it carefully several times. She wrote that she had known about the insulin. She admitted she had seen my text asking if she knew, and she had chosen not to respond. She explained that she had been at the salon getting her hair done for the concert when my message arrived. She had read it and convinced herself I was exaggerating, because Mom had always said I dramatized things. She had told herself that if she said something, the concert would be cancelled, and she had waited 3 years. She had decided I would be fine, because I was always fine. The message ended with incomplete sentences. I didn't think you would actually. I didn't think. I read her words and felt something unexpected. Not anger, not hatred, just a sad understanding. Lily wasn't a monster. She was the product of 28 years of being taught that her needs always came first. She had never learned to see other people as real, as having needs as valid as her own. I didn't reply, not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to say. 3 months later, Lily's car broke down. She needed $1,500 immediately for repairs, or she would lose her job. She called our parents first. They couldn't help. Without my monthly payments, they were barely keeping their heads above water. Then she called me. I saw her name on my screen and let it go to voicemail. For the first time in 28 years, no one rushed to rescue Lily. She had to take out a high-interest loan to fix her car. It took her 4 months to pay it off. For the first time in her life, Lily understood what it felt like to be invisible. I didn't punish them. I simply stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own choices. It turned out that was the one thing they never prepared for. 6 months later, my life looked completely different. I found a new job at a small accounting firm across town. Nothing glamorous, but when they offered me the position, they mentioned something that mattered more than salary. Health insurance starting on day 1. I accepted immediately. My new apartment was small, just a 1-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, but it was mine. I kept my insulin in the refrigerator door where I could see it every time I opened it. I set medication reminders on my phone not because I needed them after 24 years, but because taking care of myself had become an act of self-respect. I had started rebuilding friendships slowly. A coworker invited me to lunch and I said yes. A neighbor asked if I wanted to join her walking group, and I agreed. I was learning that letting people in didn't make me weak. Then one afternoon, my desk phone rang. The receptionist's voice was uncertain. "Miss Carter, there's a woman in the lobby named Linda Carter. She says she's your mother and needs to see you urgently." My whole body went cold. My mother had found my workplace. I hadn't given her the address, but somehow she had tracked me down. I took the elevator down, my heart pounding. When the doors opened, I saw her immediately. She looked thinner, older, more grey in her hair than I remembered. She was holding a paper bag, and when she saw me, her face crumpled with emotion. "Danielle," she said, her voice breaking. "I just wanted to bring you lunch. I made your favourite. I miss you so much. I don't know your home address, so I came here. Please, can we just talk?" I stood there looking at my mother, at the tears forming in her eyes. Part of me wanted to take that bag. Part of me wanted to believe she had changed. But I recognized this moment for what it was, a test. If I accepted the food, she would come back, then again. Then the boundaries would blur and I would become the old Danielle. I spoke calmly but firmly. Mom, thank you for thinking of me, but you shouldn't come to my workplace. This is my private space. If you want to communicate with me, you can write to me at Aunt Susan's address. I'll read your letters when I'm ready. Her face fell. But you never respond. You never call. It's like you've disappeared. I held her gaze steadily. That's my right, Mom, and I need you to respect that. She stood there for a long moment, the bag hanging limply in her hand. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out. I went back to my desk with trembling hands, but beneath the trembling I felt something solid. I had just passed a test that the old Danielle would have failed. 2 weeks later, Aunt Susan texted me, "Your father had a heart episode. He's in the hospital. Not critical, but serious. Your mother has been asking everyone for your address." I didn't give it to her, but I thought you should know. I stared at those words. My father, the man who told me a concert was more important than my life, was now in a hospital bed himself. The old Danielle would have rushed to his side immediately. She would have dropped everything, taken over, paid the bills, forgotten all the pain just to be the good daughter. But I was not the old Danielle anymore. I didn't go to the hospital. Instead, I bought a simple card and wrote inside, "Dad, I heard you're in the hospital. I hope you recover well. Please take care of yourself." I signed it with just my name. No love, no your daughter, just Danielle. I mailed it to Aunt Susan to deliver. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt at peace. I had chosen myself again. A few weeks later, I received a Facebook message from someone I didn't know, a woman who worked with Lily. She wrote, "Are you Lily's sister?" Lily told us what happened about the insulin and the concert. She cried at work. She said she'll never forgive herself for not speaking up. I thought you deserved to know. I read the message twice, then saved it without replying. Aunt Susan kept me updated through occasional texts. My parents had sold the house. They couldn't afford the mortgage anymore. They lived in a small apartment now. Mom cried often and told relatives she didn't know where I was. Dad had grown quiet, no longer defending himself. I absorbed this without satisfaction, without guilt. It simply was what it was. Then one day, Aunt Susan forwarded me a letter. 3 pages of shaky handwriting. My mother's words. "My daughter, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I just want you to know that I understand now. I understand we made you invisible. I understand we took and never gave. I understand we almost lost you, not because of your disease, but because of us. If you never want to see me again, I understand. But I needed to say, I'm sorry. Truly sorry." I read the letter 3 times. The first time, searching for truth. Did she really understand? The second time, searching for lies. Was this just manipulation? The third time, I simply read without judgment. And I realized something that set me free. It didn't matter whether my mother had truly changed. It didn't matter whether this letter was sincere or a tactic, because my healing didn't depend on her remorse. My whole life, I had waited for them to apologize, believing their apology would heal me. But now I understood. I didn't need their apology to move forward. I didn't need to forgive to find peace. Forgiveness was a choice, not an obligation. And choosing not to forgive didn't mean holding on to hatred. It meant protecting myself from people who had proven they could hurt me. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Maybe someday I would respond. Maybe not. That was my choice now. There was a question I used to be afraid to ask. If I stop sacrificing, who am I? I spent 36 years defining myself by what I gave away. I was the good sister, the dutiful daughter, the one who was always there. But lying in that ICU, I finally understood. I am not those roles. I am a person with needs, with limits, with a right to live. And if my family only loved me when I was giving, then they didn't love me. They loved what I provided. Now I know the truth. Love is not measured by sacrifice. Good people are allowed to have boundaries. Needing help doesn't make you weak, and healing doesn't require forgiveness. I'm no longer waiting for my family to see my worth. I've already seen it myself, and that is enough. Early morning sunlight streams through my window as I prepare my insulin injection. The right dose, at the right time, from a vial I bought with my own insurance, my own money, my own choice. I sip my coffee and watch the city wake up. For the first time in 36 years, I am not waiting for anyone to see me. I see myself, and that is enough. If Danielle's story touched something inside you, I hope you'll carry this message with you. Your worth is not measured by how much you sacrifice for others. Setting boundaries is not selfish. It is survival. And you do not owe forgiveness to people who have shown you, through their actions, that your well-being means nothing to them. Too many of us, especially women, have been taught that being a good daughter, a good sister, a good mother, means giving until there is nothing left. We have been taught that asking for help makes us burdens, that saying no makes us difficult, that walking away from toxic family makes us ungrateful. But here is the truth no one tells you. You cannot pour from an empty cup. And people who truly love you will never ask you to empty yourself completely. If you recognize yourself in Danielle's story, if you have spent years being the invisible one, the reliable one, the one who always figures it out, please know this. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be valued. And you have every right to protect yourself from those who refuse to see your worth. Thank you for listening to this story. If it resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family? We would love to hear your experience.